they've already had more than 15 days to download the data. How would we even know if they've uploaded software, if they've put spyware? We just don't know what they've done with the data, where it is, and if they've copied it. So if the American people's data is already potentially compromised, and again, the president of the United States is in the compromising classified documents business and is already a convicted felon. So if there are crimes going on, how would we even know if you all can't even subpoena Elon Musk and get some transparency?
Well, that's right. And we tried to subpoena Elon Musk, as you know, and Republicans, of course, rejected that. Well, we're gonna try everything possible that we can do to try to find out those answers. I think it's incredibly important. We do know that we're also incredibly concerned about foreign influence as it relates to Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And so not only could our data be actually weaponized against us, manipulated, monetized, but it also could be given to foreign governments to actually hurt us and our national security. So it's all incredibly concerning, but we've got to expose it. And I think what's really important when we have these discussions at our committees is that we treat this as the bar fight that it is and bring every weapon available to us to fight. This is not a moment where we should be holding hands with Republicans or hoping for some sort of bipartisan compromise. This is a time where we've got to bring the fire every single time, protest every single place where the
money was paid to New York City and was in our bank accounts when it was revoked, when it was seized last night. Elon Musk, with no legal authority, seizing it back from the city of New York. It is highway robbery, and the city can't stand for it. Musk tweeted online that these payments are in some way inappropriate because they're for luxury housing. The federal program we're talking about, the Shelter and Services Program, has a $12.50 a night cap on hotel and shelter prices. The money was paid.
Mayor Eric Adams, Michael, and you did a tweet that said, "We have a Black mega mayor, time for change." Talk about your thoughts on the DOJ calling and asking for the dismissal of this case against Mayor Eric Adams.
Vice President Eric Adams
I love it.
a compromised asset to Trump and Elon. Period, point blank. The man has no business in elected office. Let's make sure we all internalize the charges were not just because of some flight upgrades. That's the frivolousness that he tries to make it seem. It was wire fraud, bribery, corruption for a straw donation, illegal campaign. That's why he was indicted, right? Where Eric Adams himself wrote, delete the text messages. There's nobody that knows about what they're doing and saying it's not wrong if you tell someone not to delete the text messages. And so bringing it back now, the memo says very clearly they want the charges to be dropped so that he could pursue deporting people around illegal immigration and addressing crime. And at any point, they could bring charges back, which the charges have not been dropped as of yet. So let's be real clear. The man is compromised. If he has to buckle at the knee of Trump and Elon, it's not just around immigration, not just around crime. It's on anything that they would want for him to do. And that's not someone who can be mayor. And one of the main reasons why I'm running is that we deserve better. We deserve a lot of change. And the last 48, 72 hours, it proves the point of why I'm running. I'm the only one who has White House experience under a good and real president and President Obama, State House experience and local experience. And as Black folk, it is unacceptable that there is a Black man that is literally kissing up to the man who disrespected us, who called for the Central Park Five to be killed, death penalty, disrespected Obama over and over again. So at the end of the day, we just got to call it what it is. He's a compromised asset who only cares about Trump and staying out of jail.
Well, welcome to Let It Be Known News, and so much is going on. We're going to get to all of that. We got a couple of guests this morning, including Kamilah Moore from the California Reparations Task Force, and actor Harry Lennox will join us as well to talk about his new film, Godless, and also a Broadway show about the family of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. But importantly, Nia, this situation in New York, Elon Musk has run amok.
Right.
Um, there's nothing to stop him. They won't allow Congress to subpoena him. It's great. $80 million he's taken from New York.
What a way to say good morning to the Let It Be Known family. What a way to say good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. But this is an outrage.
I mean,
Like so
there's so
much that.
many things. It's so many things coming out of New York this morning. We just heard our guest from yesterday, candidate for mayor of NYC, Michael Blake, talking about they have a mega mayor. What we just saw, the $80 million that they took, the FEMA money. I mean, but we're talking about a president that is a convicted felon that is known to steal from his own college and his own students, okay? Just how or what are we gonna do?
Oh, it's it's a
What are we gonna
question.
do?
Yeah, that's a question that I'm sure people are wrestling with every second now that they have allowed
Are
this.
they really are they really wrestling with this? I don't think we're wrestling. I think we're on TikTok. I think we're trying to find out what happened to the Pakistan, the black woman that went to Pakistan. We're trying to, are we really concerned about what's happening? I don't feel it. When I go on social media, I don't feel it.
You don't
I'm just
feel it.
sorry, I
Yeah.
don't feel it.
That's a good point. That is a good point. Mike V says he's been saying since November that Biden should have stripped Elon Musk of his security. How did Elon Musk even get a security clearance? Number one, but he should have stripped him of his clearance and forced him to go back and do a 90-day review by the FBI and delayed his ability. Yeah, we can. Mike is absolutely right. We can.
Great idea. And he
Yeah, but
probably
we
has
we
it
can. But yeah, we could talk about what Biden should have done all day long. The fact is he failed. Joe Biden and the Democrats, Joe Biden
big
in
fat
particular,
F.
he failed. He failed.
Yeah, yeah.
He told us when he had the power to do something about it, that this was coming and did absolutely nothing except offer pardons to certain people.
Right.
I'm not mad at his pardons. I'm mad at who he didn't pardon, but he did nothing because the Supreme Court, folks, got to remember this. We keep saying the Supreme Court made Trump king. They made Biden king before Trump. Their ruling applied to Joe Biden as well. And he could have used that power to say, wait a minute, I am declaring a national emergency or something. And there's a lot I believe this man could have done, but it was like his farewell speech. It was like, it's all on y'all now. Get ready for the pain. Get ready for the suffering. I'm out. I'm going to Rehoboth Beach. I'm going to kick my 82-year-old self up on the beach. Now he signed a deal with CAA to do some Hollywood stuff. Come on, give me a
Well,
break.
I think that we can't, overlook and deny the underlying tone of white privilege in this country. And I don't care if you're a Democrat, I don't care if you're a Republican, there is a level of grace that they are afforded that a Black person in this country can't get. And I think that's the bigger issue as you talk about Biden. He's still part of that philosophy of this
Yep.
country of white privilege. And in response, this is what we get. We get a convicted felon as president. We get the privilege of somebody like an Elon Musk taking our money in our face and telling us he's doing it for efficiency. Now,
And
meanwhile, while they took the 80 million and they're talking about efficiency, you told 17,000 federal workers to go back to work. I didn't know what April was saying yesterday until I started seeing the story. 17,000 federal workers to go back to work, and you only have 4,000 plus parking spaces for them.
Right. And not to mention the $400 million State Department contract that they're giving Elon Musk for Tesla. This is, somebody said highway robbery. No, this is the Brinks job times a billion. I
Okay,
mean, a billion times over.
now do this. Now that he gets 400 million, but you were talking earlier, what are they doing to SNAP?
So,
He-
yeah, exactly. So here's the thing, and you remember, folks, all the talk about Project 2025 and all this with Trump saying, "Oh, that's not mine's. Mine's is Act 47 or whatever it was, right?" Project. I don't know nothing about it when we knew he was lying through his teeth, but we are now seeing the results of Project 2025 even more so because House Republicans unveiled their budget yesterday, slashing federal spending by $2 trillion, but providing $4.5 trillion in tax cuts to benefit wealthy and major corporations. But here is the deadly thing, the deadly part of this. They are cutting Medicaid and SNAP by $2 trillion.
Mm, mm.
Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP. Um, Now, Mark Thompson sent us a thing yesterday, an email. He found some stats on who uses SNAP, and it's like 60 something percent white folks. Um, and the reason I mentioned that, while it's going to hurt everybody, see, these are the things that folks always overlook when they're talking about these social safety nets like welfare, like SNAP, like WIC and stuff. The belief is it's going to really hurt these black folks. And while some black folks are going to be hurt, the majority is white. White people abuse the system much more so than black folks.
Mhm.
But the fact is, when you talk about Medicaid and Medicare, first of all, you're talking about Medicaid, the older population, right? And you talk about SNAP, you're talking about mostly single mothers and children, babies that you are hurting. And they're
Oh,
doing so with absolutely no type of care whatsoever, Neo.
I mean, this is what the folks voted for. And I think it all goes back to, we're in a constitutional crisis and we're in a space where, like, I keep the 92% of black women that half of them are not ready to get off the fence. And we need everybody right now to, I don't know what the plan is. I mean, we know we had Dr. Jamal Bryant on the show earlier this week, and we know that we have a boycott coming up. I saw February 28th is a blackout day where they're saying, don't buy anything on February 28th. I mean, we're talking about all the problems, but going back to what I said earlier, what are we going to do? Because we see
Mm.
what they're doing. But I
Well,
always like, what are we going to do? I mean, we did our job in November, but now it's like, what's the next step?
yeah, yeah. And we always tend to get when we talk about the reality of what's going on, we always tend to get a MAGA person, or at least a MAGA leaning person. This guy John Smith, whoever he might be, says, "Boohoo for those federal workers. These black children have been suffering in the Democratic ran schools for decades, and there have been little concern for that." First and foremost, it's asinine to say that black children have been suffering. It shows your racism, because black black kids thrive, and this is why you guys continue to attack uh, affirmative action and DE and I, because black children have well exceeded others. Black men and women have well exceeded others, and so your desire to see black people suffer really goes along with your desire for white supremacy. So, John, thanks for watching. I could care less if you continue to watch. Um, Monique says, exactly. Remember in my teenage years working for the supermarket, they focused on all the people of color thinking we were stealing when the older white folks rob us blind. Exactly. We've seen this time and again. And this is why, again, when we talk about DE&I and affirmative action, you had to put these programs in place. And they've only benefited DE&I. We know, we've dissected it, benefits white women. More than it does Black and Latino people. We know this, but
Yeah,
they put these things in place because although Black folks thrive and exceed in just about everything, it's the matter of white folks being threatened by it.
right.
And so, go ahead, Miguel.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like two things. I mean, we have to have, and this is the conversation that they want us to get away from. That's why they want to take out Black history and it from the schools and things like that, is because this country, until we address systemic racism and the biggest issue in this country, which is racism, we're going to continue to have this cycle. Like, we have to break the curse, right? We have to address these issues. And I think Barack Obama becoming president is the prime example of what made them fear their supremacy rise. It's because they saw the turning of the tide. I mean, that's the first thing we have to address. The second thing we have to address is a lot of times in these spaces, we're talking to each other. Like, as the church said, you're preaching to the choir. How are we going to mobilize our communities to have the passion that Black folks had, when they was running for freedom? To have the passion that Black folks had when it was time for civil rights movement and to march and to boycott, to where we had to stick together in order to survive. We're missing that right now. And until we address those two, we're going to continue to go in this vicious cycle, because no, we're talking to each other. We see the issues, but the mass majority is not. We need them to tune in to us instead of tuning in to the scroll. You know what I'm saying? Or what's the trending topic of the day? The trending topic of the day is Kai Cenat saying that the people weren't cheering for Kendrick Lamar like it looked on TV. That defeats the purpose of everything that Kendrick Lamar tried to show it the world. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, we have to get on the same accord and push an agenda, just like the Trump clan is pushing.
Yeah, and Carson, forget. I mean, he needs to stay in his lane.
Right.
And then you got stuff like this. In Brooklyn, a man posing as an ICE agent punched, robbed, and tried to rape a woman there in Brooklyn Heights. The victim is a 51-year-old Hispanic woman. She was waiting for a cab in the lobby of a building near Montauk and Henry Streets in Brooklyn Heights when she was confronted about 10:50 a.m. He said he was with immigration. And so this is another thing that you have to, why this program that the hateful dictator has put into place, where he's running around trying to round up people, and they've rounded up as many Americans as they have folks who are immigrants. And you get these copycats, and then you go out in places like Arizona, where you have a sheriff out there saying he's going to deputize citizens to go round up illegal immigrants. How dangerous is that?
You know what it reminds me of? The whole original concept of policing was slave catching. And so now you have all of these different entities feeling emboldened because there's not going to be any accountability from a white supremacist government, leadership. They're going to bypass all that. Look, they let all the Trump clan supporters that rioted the Capitals, insurrectionists is too sexy of a word. They were rioters, okay?
Right.
You let them all out, and this is what you have. You have, people feeling like emboldened to, like, now, I don't even feel comfortable wearing my Black Lives Matter shirts or shirts that empower Black people. Because I don't know what these crazy white folks is going to do right now, because they have been emboldened to say things to us and to do things to us that they feel like they're not going to be held accountable for. So I think this whole situation is bigger. And like I say, we have to figure out how to mobilize our community, because unless we do that, next thing you know, we might be rounded up and out there picking them strawberries.
Well, and that's and that is the whole idea, Neo, and people laugh at that and think about that. But the idea of taking away social safety nets, the idea of taking away education, destroying the Department of Education, the idea that we want to take away jobs, the costs going up so high. We see it. The end goal here is to put everyone in a situation where they're going to rely on Donald Trump, his government, right? And the question becomes, like we were talking about Eric Adams, what is he asking back for you? He wants you to be in that spot where you have to basically bend the knee. You have to bow down. That is what this is all about. And they say it themselves. Let's not read the we don't even have to read between the lines anymore, by the way. The idea that they say stuff like plane crashes because of DEIs, because of Black folks, which Black folks have nothing to do with that whatsoever. Um, the idea we saw the other day, the man was saying how, oh, the real key here is the fact that they want to get rid of all Black and brown people. They stopped the abortion so white women would not have. They don't care about Black women. They want white women to have as many babies as they can. This is all about the browning of America and stopping that and keeping that power. That's what it's all about. And so they want to get rid of us. And so those who are they feel useful, Eric Adams, we got him in the corner, we got him in the box. So let's pardon him. And now now you see the results are already there. 80 million for Elon Musk, right? We talked a little about Diddy. There's got to be something in it for Trump if he's going to pardon Diddy. It's a quid pro quo.
I don't know. As far as Eric Adams is concerned, I mean, I think he bent the knee, but I also think that Trump saw something like-minded in Eric. If Eric Adams was taking briberies from foreign entities, that sounds like somebody I can align myself with, because he's like-minded. So I think it's even more so, more than bending the knee. It's about finding allies that will be corrupt with you. And Eric Adams appears to be one of those people who doesn't have a problem with being corrupt or self-serving issues.
Then you have
there, you get that type of partnership, and then you see the two stories that we talked about this morning. Eric Adams isn't going to touch it, because meanwhile, he's able to go back to doing what he was doing before he was held accountable for it.
And then you have the obvious bootlicking Clarence Thomas and Byron Donalds and Tim Scott. You have the obvious ones who just will just do whatever. They will put on makeup and a dress and a thong and please Trump. It's just simple as that. The United States, and then to go along with that, the U.S. has fallen to its lowest ranking ever on the Corruption Perceptions Index, according to Transparency International. The index, of course, comes as the president signed an executive order that basically stops the enforcement of bribing foreign officials. And so the Transparency International's latest CPI report, it ranks 180 countries and territories, and Denmark is the least corrupt country according to the CPI index. Meanwhile, the United States is one of the most corrupt countries according to the CPI index.
Sounds about right.
It's just, yeah, it's about right, right?
Mhm.
I mean, you
No,
think about all of this is going on, Niel. It makes sense.
yeah. Only what are we, 3 weeks in? 3, 4 weeks in? And we're already trending for corruption?
Yes, already. And it is, in fact, the ranking, the U.S. Is its lowest it has uh, ever been, according to the CPI. So
I like
there you
what
have it.
I like what Drea said. She said we have to get the youth out of the baddies mindset and being another Kai or I speed so we could get them to focus on what's going on in the world. Totally agree with you, Drea. And I also think that we need to get the baddies and the Kai Sanats and the streamers to be able to help us convey the message of what the call to action is. You know what I'm saying? Like, how can we
Hmm.
get them involved
Right.
to help us get this message out? You know, because like when you think of the civil rights era, there were tons of celebrities that participated in the movement, some of them publicly, some of them behind the scenes. But I just think that, you know, we have to start having intergenerational conversations, right? So that sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes they just don't know. And we have
Hmm.
to, you know, be able to open up the conversation so that they feel like they have a space to be able to participate. And then they have to know what's at stake. Not for you. Maybe you've made it, but I'm sure you got a whole family of cousins and aunts and uncles that haven't made it, that need these types of resources and support that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And Southbound 3000 makes this point, Niel. All this makes me think other ethnic groups have secret think tanks and we don't. What's the deal? Do we have our own think tanks, Niel?
I think we do, but I think we're too inclusive. You know, when you look at
Okay.
I used to always say I used to executive produce a show, and it was centered in blackness and black news. But you know, we had a couple of Latino participants, and so the show was black centered news. And I would always have to remind them, can I go to La Opinion or to Telemundo and start talking about black stuff? You know, you don't even
Mm,
talk in my language. So why are you mad at me or us for trying to hold a space for Black centered news? Because I
yeah,
can't go to your community and talk my talk because you
yeah.
guys have that. And I feel like for us, we've been so inclusive that we sometimes forget we have to be unapologetically Black with certain issues. And it's not to say that we're against you, because what Black people have done in this country have always benefited all people of color. But I think we need to just get more centered in our Blackness and stop being so inclusive when it comes to certain things, because like you said, they have their think tanks, they have theirs, and they are
Yeah.
advocating for their communities, and we need to be more protective of ours.
Well, and just real
Introduce
quick,
H.R. 40, historic legislation to establish a federal commission to examine the lasting legacy of slavery, to develop reparations proposals for descendants of enslaved Africans. It is an honor to inherit the privilege of carrying this bill forward. From Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. In my last correspondence with her, she said, keep working on our priorities and never give up. Today, I'm deeply
yeah.
honored.
Yeah, as we segue, before we do that, I have to point out, and David Youngblood did mention this, we do have the Joint Center is one of the Black think tanks, and they are awesome. The Joint Center is absolutely awesome. So, absolutely. So today, Niel, we are speaking with Kamilah Moore, the chairperson of the California Reparations Task Force, an esteemed reparations justice scholar and attorney. Ms. Moore has expressed significant concerns over the recent legislative setbacks concerning reparations proposals in California, as we see Representative Ayanna Pressley again reintroduce HR 40. Let's bring on Miss Kamilah Moore. Welcome to Let It Be Known.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for
Oh, it's
joining us this morning.
Yeah, it's an absolute privilege. Kamilah Moore, I know a lot's been going on. We thought for a moment there, and silly us for thinking that California was actually going to give its citizens reparations.
I guess so. Silly us, right? So the task force was an official legislative advisory body. So we worked from June 2021 to June 2023, advising the legislature and the public on the types of reparations proposals that should become law. And so after the task force ended, the California Legislative Black Caucus took up the mantle, read the report, introduced bills inspired by the report, particularly at the time, State Senator Stephen Bradford, who also served on the task force with me, who was also in the legislature and in the CLBC. He was the vice chair at the time. He independently introduced some very powerful legislation in last year's legislative session to create a new reparations office, particularly for descendants of American slaves, for Black Americans, a reparations fund, and a bill to allow for Black folks to get land back that was taken via racially motivated eminent domain. And unfortunately, there was a lot of infighting within the CLBC towards the end of the last legislative session, and that contributed to his bills dying in the legislature, particularly the fund bill and the agency bill, which never made it to Governor Newsom's desk. The land bill that would have allowed for folks to get their land back did make it to Newsom's desk, but Newsom vetoed that bill, citing that the companion bill, the agency bill, had never made it to his desk, so therefore he had to veto the land bill. So say all that to say that legislative session is over. We're currently in a new legislative session, so the CAC members have a chance to redeem themselves, but also the entire legislature, because all legislators can introduce reparations bills. It doesn't just have to be the Black ones. And I'll just close by saying February 21st is the deadline, the legislative deadline for all legislators to introduce bills for this legislative session. So we have less than 9 days to see what legislators in California will come up with when it comes to reparations in this state.
Kamilah, thank you for joining us this morning. A lot of people think, when you think of reparations, we have the concept of 40 acres and a mule, or you're thinking money. But can you briefly talk to us about some of the ways that California defined what reparations is?
Yes, absolutely. And so California, we were guided by the statute that created our bill, our task force, which was a bill called AB 3121. And that bill was actually introduced by then Assembly member at the time, Shirley Weber, who's now California's first African-American Secretary of State. Just wanted to provide that context. But to your exact point, in that bill, it stated that we had to, as a commission, as a task force, follow international law. I've actually studied international law. I'm an attorney, and I've studied international human rights law as it relates to reparations. I wrote a thesis on global reparatory justice for people of African descent. And I use that as leverage to apply to be on the task force. And so under international law, there are actually 5 forms of reparations. Most Americans and most people, when they think about reparations, they solely think about cash or compensation. And that is a key and necessary component of reparations. You cannot have reparations without compensation. But under international law, there's additional forms of reparations as well, 4 additional forms. And so those 4 forms are restitution, which is related to compensation, right? It's taking account for stolen land, right? So that land bill that I was talking about is a form of restitution. Or, it takes account for stolen intellectual property. When we talk about the amount of patents, right? Scientific innovations and inventions that Black Americans never truly got credit for. What does repair look like in that instance? Another form of reparations includes rehabilitation, right? That's the 3rd form of reparations under international law. How do you rehabilitate the mind? What does that look like? Free healthcare from cradle to grave, free mental health services for Black Americans, things like that. The fourth form of reparations under international law is satisfaction. So that gets at more symbolic forms of repair. What I argue that we've kind of really already seen, at least in the immediate past, right? Formal apologies on behalf of the state or the United States for their harms against African Americans. But they have not gone further than that, then a formal apology, and then a formal acknowledgement. The taking down of Confederate monuments, we've seen that, particularly post-2020 with the George Floyd uprisings. The renaming of streets, things like that. And then last but not least, the fifth form of reparations is guarantees of non-repetition. And so that gets at more structural and institutional policy change and reform. It's one of the hardest forms of reparations to achieve. How do you get the offending party, the state, to guarantee to stop harming the harmed group, the victim group? And what are the mechanisms that you employ to make sure that happens? So just in all, under international law, 5 forms of reparations: compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition.
Yeah, and you mentioned the land part, and one of the reasons I think some folks anyway, and certainly I would imagine as you guys went along with the commission, believe that there was a really good chance that reparations could happen in California. The Willa and Charles Bruce situation really was one of those things I know from the outside looking in, and we reported on them, that gave you hope that this could actually happen, because finally, 98 years beforehand, they had their land stolen from them, and it was given back. It was awarded back to them 98 years later in 2022. So talk about that and the precedent that set. How much did that give you hope? Because I know from, like I said, from the outside, it did seem to give a lot of hope.
Thank you for that question. I agree. It definitely gave me hope, particularly because the person behind that bill, the legislator behind, that effort to give the land back to the Bruces, was Senator Stephen Bradford, State Senator Stephen Bradford, who, as I mentioned, served on the task force with me and also served in the state Senate. He actually termed out this December, so he's no longer in the state legislature anymore. And I say that to say, and just to go back to, it's unfortunate that there was infighting with the CLBC, particularly around strategy, right? Because whereas Senator Stephen Bradford was on the task force with me, was also in the state legislature, also in the CLBC, he wanted to introduce strong reparations bills after the task force was over, right? At the last task force meeting, he cried, right? He said this experience was the most transformative political experience in his entire career, and he has been in public service for over 20 years. He served in the state legislature, the max time limit, 12, 13 years. And so that's why he introduced bills to create a new a new reparations office, to create a new reparations fund, to create a mechanism for Black folks to get their land back. However, the other CLBC members who, some were not on the task force, maybe did not really have that transformative experience because of that. They were comfortable with, I guess, introducing bills that were more so low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Like a formal apology, which we need, or some other things. So I'll just say, I know I got a little bit off track, but to the point of your question, I was inspired by the Bruce Beach example. I thought that meant that, folks would be supportive of Senator Stephen Bradford, including Governor Newsom, of, these types of bills that were inspired by, Bruce Beach, like the land bill, like the agency bill, like the fund bill. But unfortunately, those bills, died at the last legislative session.
Let's talk a little bit about the California Black legislators. So we know that, there are a lot of Black California constituents that aren't happy with Black legislators here in California. So from the time that they decided not to move the bills to the governor's office, a lot of word on the street is that they didn't think that the governor would sign the bills, and they didn't want to push a lot of those bills up because they didn't want their bills to get rejected. Okay, we get that. But what is happening now between the California Black constituents and the Black legislators? Are you guys talking to them to try to find a medium for what you guys want proposed to send to the governor's office?
Yes, absolutely. And so I want to take the opportunity to plug amazing reparations organizations, particularly CJEC, the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. They've been working on reparations in the state of California for years now, and they have, worked on maintaining relationships within the legislature, particularly, throughout this entire process, but restarting those conversations after August 31st, right after that past legislative session. And so we have members of CJEC who have literally been at the state capitol every single day since the state capitol reopened this past December. CJEC had a lobby day, actually brought 200 folks to the state capitol the first day that it opened this year on January 7th, and did lobby visits, legislative drop-in visits. So groups of folks within CJEC visited every single legislative office to make sure, that it was clear that these are still, the top priorities in terms of reparations. And then also, yes, members of CJEC are also having, meetings with CLBC members. And so we'll see, CJEC and reparationists are there to support, have always been there to support. So it's really up to the CLBC in this next 9 days to really show and prove, to see what they come up with in terms of reparations bills.
Yeah, and you mentioned the apology part. I know San Francisco back in I believe it was February of last year, the Board of Supervisors there did formally apologize. I know it happened in Boston as well, where they formally apologized. Why is Kamilah, why does it seem that apologies are so hard to come by for something so egregious? There was a quick response in comparison anyway when it comes to apologizing for the Holocaust.
Mm. That's a good question. Yes. So a lot of people try to trivialize apologies. No, I'm not that person. I'm not going to trivialize apology. It's a huge thing that the state of California, recently apologized for, their role in slavery and institutional segregation. And it's hard to come by when it comes to us as Black Americans and just Black folks in general, because anti-Blackness, one, is so pervasive. But then also, it's also in part because if you apologize, that's under international law, right? That is kind of the foundation for, more, additional repair, more substantive repair, like compensation, like restitution. And so that's also kind of part of the calculus for why I think, certain folks in power, certain institutions have been so reluctant to apologize to us.
And speaking of San Francisco, one of the proposals that came out of their commission was a $5 million lump sum payment and a guaranteed income of $100,000 a year. But they also had other mechanisms. They had this. They were going to place money in Black banks. They were this money would go through Black banks, I should say, and they would also provide financial advisors to those receiving reparations. Obviously, it has not happened yet. Their reparations, but where do we start? We talk about the money in, we talk about the land, but I'd like to focus in on that financial advisor part and the Black banks part. How important are those, and is that a part of what you're seeking overall?
Good question on the issue of financial literacy, and different task forces. The California Reparations Task Force, we came up with different things compared to other task forces, like the San Francisco Commission, as you mentioned. They recommended $5 million to each person and each Black person in San Francisco. In the state of California, for instance, as it relates to compensation, we didn't necessarily say, okay, each eligible person should get this amount. We said we hired 4 economists to study the state's role in various forms of institutional discrimination. And, of the various forms, they were able to quantify 5 harms. And across those 5 harms, they counted that, the state, pretty much stole from, wealth building opportunities for Black Americans, like $800 billion. And so, I was just bringing that up as an example to say, like, every task force was different in terms of their methodology, in terms of the frameworks that they deployed. But when it comes to financial literacy, for instance, the California Reparations Task Force, we didn't necessarily recommend that there's something similar. We didn't necessarily recommend that, there be like financial advisors. Not to say that that's a bad idea. But for instance, the task force, we did recommend, the creation of this new state agency, the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency, a reparations office. And within that agency, there would be various branches, like a business affairs branch. And, that branch would, provide business grants to descendants of slaves to maintain and to form businesses. And then, theoretically, that business affairs office would, also provide resources related to financial advising and literacy and things like that. The agency also would have had a housing affairs, a place where folks could get housing grants to purchase their first home, to rectify the fact that there's a home ownership gap, or an education affairs gap, a branch that would facilitate free college tuition to descendants of slaves in Cal States and University of California. So, we really went for a holistic approach, particularly for the recommendation to create the new state agency. And I'll just close by saying it's really unfortunate that the CLBC chose not to bring that bill to a vote. Literally, that bill went through the entire legislative process. The only step it needed was for that final vote on the assembly floor, and then it would have gone to Newsom's desk to sign. Then I'll conclude by also saying, even though they did not bring that bill to the floor vote for a final vote, they did commit to bring it back. So they have 9 days to, hold fast on that commitment on bringing it back. And then I promise the last thing I'll say is how unfortunate this bill, the agency bill and the fund bill, was blocked by them, because think about how that could have been useful, particularly where we're seeing victims of the fires in Altadena, mostly Black folks. Like the data shows that literally 50% of Black Altadena, which I partly grew up in Altadena from 7th grade to high school, 50% of Black Altadena is gone. Imagine if that agency, the infrastructure was already in play. That agency was supposed to have an office of immediate relief for situations like this, to help people in need, in immediate need. That office was supposed to, like I said, have a housing grants, housing affairs office to help people rebuild, all that type of stuff. And so we could have had a reparations fund bill, where that fund could have gone, those funds could have gone directly to families in need. So, we as humans don't know, what's going to happen. But, we have to take advantage of the opportunities that we have. And so that's why it was really just unfortunate that the CLBC kind of just missed their mark on that.
I appreciate the way you connected something that it literally just happened to what could have been if the bills wasn't passed. And for our family viewers that are listening, CLBC is for the California Black legislators, and I think it's also important to know that the Black legislators did say that they were going to move that bill forward. And they changed their mind the day of the vote. I think that's important to note, that while this came out of committee appropriations and it moved, and they were supposed to vote on it that day and they chose not to. I think that's really important. I want to ask you now, since California leads the way for reparations, intensive study, you guys spent 2 years on this committee, doing all these findings. Yesterday when we spoke, you said you had a chance to look at Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley's HR 40. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I think it's a great development that on the federal level, reparations is still being seen as a priority to push, at least within, the Congressional Black Caucus, or at least with amongst Black legislators on the federal level. So, I'm very, happy to see, Representative Ayanna Pressley reintroduce HR 40, right? Picking up the mantle from the late Sheila Jackson Lee, who picked up the mantle from the late John Conyers. So, it's a great development, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how things develop. The only thing I'll say is, how feasible, how successful will this bill be under a Trump administration, where obviously Trump has stated things that can be interpreted to be anti-reparations, and there is a Republican-controlled House and Republican-controlled Senate, and we know that Republicans have been extremely hostile to reparations. And so, how successful, will this bill be, at least in this presidential term? Jury's not out, because obviously, these bills need co-sponsors, right? To be able to be moved, they need a certain amount of co-sponsors. If Democrats are in the minority, that might be a bit difficult for the bill to move. But at the same time, look, this is great that, reparations continues to kind of stay out there in the public sphere.
Right.
I wanted to also mention, and Shonda H. did answer Mike V's question about when did slavery as a practice end in California. California outlawed slavery. It was not in their constitution, but what was in their constitution, their constitution requires citizens to help recapture escaped slaves. So their history is a little complicated too, but it also, Kamilah, it makes it even more interesting that California is really what you guys are doing out there is really a model for the country. Really, it's a model really for HR 40. It's a model for what's going on around the country, even though California has more of a complicated history when it comes to slavery.
Absolutely, and excuse me, that was the intent. Was for California to be seen as a model, to set the precedent for what repair could look like for other states and nationally as well. And I say that because California was the first state to do this type of work. We even so to speak beat the federal government. Reparations first and foremost for slavery is a federal responsibility, right? Federal government, Congress should be doing or should have done what California did. And in light of that, for instance, in terms of the final report that we produced, right, this 1,100-page document that we produced.
Where can you watch? Where can you, before you move forward, tell everybody where they can read the report?
Yes, so it's on the task force DOJ website. So it's oag.ca.gov/AB3121/report. Or most likely you can Google like California reparations report, and it should be the first result.
Okay.
Sorry, it's a bit wonky, but in that 1,100-page final report, in terms of how we structured it, each chapter we go over. Obviously, the first chapter we go over slavery. The remaining chapters we go over what we call the lingering badges and incidents of slavery. Right, the 12 major areas of systemic discrimination that has negatively impacted our wealth building opportunities and other things. And so within each of those chapters, there's a California section. This is my main point. And then there's a federal section, right? So the California section, we obviously go through California's history and how California has perpetuated slavery and has perpetuated these other areas of systemic discrimination, like the wealth gap, like housing discrimination, like education discrimination, like discrimination in labor, yada, yada, yada. But there's also a federal section in each of those chapters where we talk about obviously the federal government's role in perpetuating these harms. And we also talk about other states as well. So it's very copious, like, and very holistic. We don't only focus on California in that report, because we understand that, we're the first state to do this work. New York, Illinois was the second. They're still working. New York is the third. They're still working. But California is the only state that has completely finished its work. And so we hope that leads to us being seen as, setting the precedent for what repair should look like.
Yeah, and Kamilah, I think Russell St. Clair brings up a point. He says that as a former indentured servant of California, California didn't end indentured servitude until 1994. California still uses the tax policies, and he's advising never to sign anything. But it is true that where incarcerated people can be forced to work against their will in California. Has that the indentured servitude situation, has that come up at all in your discussions?
Oh, that's a really good question. Thank you for raising that. And actually, the task force, we did recommend as one of our recommendations for the California Constitution to be amended to no longer allow that slavery loophole, to no longer allow for incarcerated folks to be enslaved, to work for free in prisons. And so actually, one of the CLBC members, Lori Wilson, she actually introduced a bill this past legislative session, inspired by that recommendation. And that bill was ACA 6. Well, it was ACA 6. And so because it required for the California Constitution to be amended, that type of bill once it passed through the state legislature, didn't go to Newsom to sign or veto. Since it required for the California Constitution to be amended, it went to the voters to decide. So that was on our ballot November for California voters to decide whether we wanted to end slavery in prisons. And while in the legislature, that bill was called ACA 6, it transferred over to being Proposition 6 on the ballot. And so actually that ballot failed in California this November. Most voters were perfectly fine with having incarcerated folks be enslaved or work for free in prison. So it just shows, California, we have this progressive reparations task force and we did great work, but at the same time, there's a lot more work to be done, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, before we let you go, Kamilah, let's talk about the cultural aspect of 40 Acres and what Kendrick Lamar did on Sunday. I know after the performance, you were on social media, you pulled the clip. Talk about the significance of Kendrick Lamar, calling out and recognizing 40 Acres.
Yes, I mean, it was just absolutely significant. I was watching the Super Bowl halftime show and I was just like so ecstatic when I heard that, honestly, because I've been wanting Kendrick to talk about reparations, particularly with this GNX album. I've been seeing kind of the threads, I've been listening to his album and I'm like, why hasn't he talked about reparations yet? And so I'm just like, thank God that he mentioned 40 Acres in the movie, right? He didn't necessarily even have to say reparations, but being the true artist that he is, he just brilliantly brought up 40 Acres and a Mule in his Super Bowl performance. And, that just reinvigorated reparations first and foremost, but it also just educated the country. Like, this has been, the Super Bowl was the most watched program of all time. And, there's articles showing that, after his performance, unprecedentedly, so many people were looking up 40 Acres and a Mule, was Googling it, right? I took for granted, right, being in the reparations space for so long, I'm thinking a lot of people or most people even knew about this. I'm learning through Kendrick's performance, a lot of people didn't even know about 40 Acres and a Mule. And so this to me presents a special ordained opportunity for us to continue the conversation. This conversation on reparations is not dead, right? And thank God for Kendrick for bringing life back into the discussion.
Well, Interesting stuff. Neil had to, Camilla, by the way, she had to educate me on all of that too. So this is some good stuff. But we really appreciate you dropping in and to really bring forward this really vital information, particularly now because we certainly are in quite the times, and what you guys are doing out there in California really shows that look, nothing's gonna stop us. We're all the way up. So, Neil, any last thoughts for Camilla as she leaves?
Oh no, I just thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. You know, you're not going to get this conversation on MSNBC or CNN. They're not going to take the time to do reparations like we do here at Let It Be Known. And we definitely want to have you back. You talked on Altadena and what's happening there with the Black families and the fighters. And we know that you're a part of Ben Crump's attorney team and that there's been a lawsuit filed. So we definitely want to have you back as that situation progresses and to give us more updates.
Absolutely. I would love to come back and share updates on that case against Southern California Edison for their role in the fires.
Thank you so much.
The chair of the California Reparations Task Force. Thanks for joining. Let It Be Known. Yeah, that was some interesting stuff there.
Yeah, it just goes to show you that sometimes the conversation is between us when you think of the California Black legislators. And there's a lot of Black constituents that are very upset with the California Black legislators here in California. And it could impact some of their bids for reelection. You know, there's a lot of conversation out here about what Black legislators they're going to target in their upcoming reelection bids. So the conversation goes on. And so we'll definitely continue to have that conversation.
Yeah, and also just on a side note, Russell St. Clair, he raised a great question. Russell was not incarcerated, so we don't want anyone to think he was incarcerated. He was just saying that California took 65% of his wages. He left in 1994, so we just wanted to make sure that was very clear. Now we are diving into a powerful new film that explores the explosive clash between faith and politics. It's called Godless, and it tells the story of a Catholic Church governor.
Cannot excommunicate me.
What a fiasco.
I want a change.
This is not change.
Then what is it?
This is a nuclear bomb.
Damn it, Reggie. We had a plan.
This is the plan.
This is not the plan.
This is the Roman Catholic Church, and you've pissed them off. They can outspend you and outlast you. They've been around for 2,000 years, and they'll be around for 2,000 more.
You do not serve our Lord by your own greed.
You, Governor, have an obligation to your faith.
If you don't sign this bill into law, it's over. I mean, your career, gone.
Do yourself a favor, ask for forgiveness, and do not sign that abortion bill if it ever crosses your desk.
I'll win the election. I have the votes.
The world is watching us.
Joining us now is actor Harry Lennox, and I think we have Mike Reese Giuliano, if I said his name right. Also, welcome to the Black Press's Let It Be Known.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, Harry, many might know Harry for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that sticks out for me is the role in the Five Heartbeats. So, it's always a pleasure. So, let's start with you, Mike. What inspired you to write Godless, and what message do you hope it delivers in today's political climate?
I started writing Godless as a play, maybe 5-6 years ago. And originally it was actually going to be in Latin regarding a tribunal that the church has when they do their own internal investigation for whatever it is. And from that, it kind of morphed into a play regarding the excommunication of a politician who is Catholic, who signs into law a progressive law, and the political fallout that kind of ensues once she does that, because she wants to run for higher office. and the bishop of her diocese is trying to thwart her from kind of becoming the face of the church as a Catholic politician who's not supporting the views of the church. And that's kind of how we got to today. It came from a play, then we hit COVID, and we decided to transfer it into a film. So I converted to a film, and we shot it in October of 2023.
Wow. And before I throw it to you, Neil, Harry, let me go to you. Your character, Bishop Reginald Rowland, has enormous influence. He wields an enormous influence. How did you approach playing a man whose faith and authority collide with modern politics?
Well, it's not hard to find. Thanks for having me on, by the way. Nice to meet you both. And you too. Good to see you, Mike. But
Hi, big guy.
I think that, there's a lot of opportunity to look at this conflict between faith and law, as it were, or man's law, and or civil law, as it were, and what we think is right in the church. I'm a former seminarian, so I was going to be a Catholic priest, so I know a lot of priests, and so in terms of the manner of the character, it was pretty simple. But in terms of where to come down on that issue, I think we're still debating it. What is reasonable in a modern church? What position? I mean, the church has been quite consistent, as we know, vis-a-vis the right to life and so on. So it's not hard to find material to study on it.
Yeah, Neil, I'll throw it to you.
I've been thinking about this a lot, about how they say faith and politics don't go together, but they've been married since the beginning of time. You can go back to King Henry, you can go back to the Borgias, it's always been there. But I want to know from both of you, what do you want the viewer to walk away with at the end of this film? You, Michael.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I think that there is definitely an overlap between faith and politics. I'm not saying that one needs to play a role in the other, but I think that one definitely influences how people view the world. And it's not that easy to separate the two, especially if you are a devout Catholic, which is one of the issues I think that Bishop Rowland is bringing up. If you're going to be a Catholic, then you need to believe in the teachings of the Catholic Church. You can't, you have an obligation to your faith, and you can't separate them, because once you do that and the Catholic Church kind of lets you slide, then all of a sudden all the other Catholics say, well, wait a second, this politician is able to separate the two, is able to vote a certain way that the Catholic Church doesn't want them to. And that's what the bishop is trying to stop. At the end of the day, the movie to me is about forgiveness, is about understanding between the two. It's not coming down hard one way or the other. It really is trying to show that there is compassion on both sides and there is a dialogue on both sides. But I don't think that, especially now that more power is being brought back to the states from the federal government, that I think that religion plays an important role in how people are voting. Because before, if the law was just a federal law and it went out to everyone, and it was, the politicians say, well, how do you feel about abortion? And you would say, well, it's the law of the land. It's just, that's what it is. Now they're giving those powers back to the state. And in those scenarios, you can't, as a Catholic or as someone who is of the faith, if they ask you the question, you can't say, well, the federal government's already ruled on it, because now it's up to the state. And how you vote will depend on some of these matters, whether you get reelected. And I think that politicians, Catholic politicians in particular, now take heed as to what the Catholic vote or the Catholic base is saying, or whatever your religion is. So I think that it's a discussion where there's a discussion on both sides. There's no question about it. It's not one or the other.
Do you do you know and perhaps even conferred with someone like Senator Raphael Warnock, who is also I mean he's a well-known pastor, is a well-known reverend, preached at Martin Luther King's church. That is his church. Have you spoken to anyone in politics who also is in the faith, priest or preacher or anything like that?
What I did was, when I was writing it, I conferred just on the law side, on the canon law, with a very, very, very smart canon lawyer who was also a Monsignor. His name was Jack Alessandro, and he was very instrumental when they rewrote the canon back in the 80s. So he was very well versed. So I wanted to make sure on that end I was on pretty solid ground in terms of what the canon law is and what the obligations are as a Catholic in how you conduct yourself. I grew up around politics. My father was involved in politics. His law partner was the chairman of the Republican Party here in New York on the island, Nassau County. So I understood how, in my mind, how the fallout would be. So it as a Catholic, as myself, I can understand how the conflict would arise. So dealing that with the politician herself, I could understand that as a Catholic. And then having grown up around politics and kind of the bigger picture, because there's politics in the church, right? There's politics, obviously, in everything that we do. How that would kind of evolve when you have a bishop who doesn't necessarily get the approval, even though he doesn't need it as the bishop of a diocese. He kind of throws this bomb in there. And now everyone's scrambling to see, because some of the Catholic conservatives, they are applauding him. But maybe some of the Catholics that are a little bit more liberal, they're saying, wait a second, you shouldn't be doing this. And it's how it's affecting both of them kind of in their own journey for themselves.
Yeah, and I know oftentimes actors will get with someone who they're, I mean, he's not portraying the Raphael Warnock, for instance, but they generally, Harry, you guys generally will spend some time around like-minded individuals or whatever, just to get even deeper. And that's why I was wondering, had you spent any time with any of these politicians? That was the basis of the question, really.
Oh, I also wanted to point out, Brother Stacy, that Raphael Warnock is not a Catholic, and so it doesn't matter. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't matter what any politician or any liberal priest might say. The Catholic Church, with its views on life, that's dogma. We don't have a choice. It doesn't matter what we think about it. We don't even have to agree with it. But the fact is, you have to believe it because it says so. And if you don't do that, then you are at odds with the church.
Yeah. And just, again, to be clear, I wasn't trying to say that you're trying to get their ideas or whatever, just getting into character. Would that have helped getting into character? That generally, I hear a lot of actors say that. That's why I asked that question. But
not for me.
It's okay.
Not
okay.
For me.
All right. There we go.
It's very important. It's very important. I guess in some ways, in this way, I am very much like the character I'm playing, or have taken on that character. I don't give a damn what any other priest says, or for that matter, what the Pope says. This character doesn't care. That the fact is that if you're a Catholic, you must believe this, and you must be consistent. It doesn't matter your faith, your all of that. If you're a Catholic, you have to believe this.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
I apologize. No, one of the things that the bishop says in the film is, look, I'm not saying if you don't want to believe it, that's okay. Just don't say that you're a good Catholic and that you're following the teachings of the Catholic Church, especially when it comes down to election time. He's not, that's the thing. That was one of the things he was trying to say is, you have an obligation to your faith. You don't get to be what we used to call back, in Brooklyn, a cafeteria Catholic, right? I'll take some of that, but I'm not going to. I don't want some of that. His position is, look, the fact that some of the priests or bishops are saying to politicians, well, maybe if you're coming in my diocese, don't take communion because you're outside of they just go to a different diocese that they can take communion. So, he's really, Bishop Rowland's just kind of throwing out and saying, look, I'm just kind of going to blow this up and let's see where it lands.
I'm going to ask this question to Harry. Did you learn anything about the Catholic Church or your faith that you discovered after the movie was complete?
No, I don't think I learned anything new. I mean, Michael and I are both, fairly devout. As I say, I studied, to be a priest, and of course, it's a constant study. The catechism, the law, all of that. That's something that we are obligated to continuously remind ourselves the position on and to study. I find, by the way, that a lot of new Catholics know a lot more than most Catholics I know, because they have to look at what it says. Sometimes people are just born into it and think that they know. But one of the great things, Neil, is that there's this thing called the Catholic Encyclopedia. You can go and check it out, but it tells you precisely where the church stands on every issue. I think there's very little that it does not cover. So in terms of what to eat on Sunday, these kinds of the animals have souls, any number of these issues, all of them. I think Catholic in itself means universal, it means all encompassing. And so it's a lot to study. So I'm not claiming to know everything about it, but vis-a-vis what I learned after the movie, I think it's not, I wouldn't say I can point to anything.
The film explores, of course, the public scrutiny and the internal conflict. How does Godless reflect the real, I guess you say, real world pressures that politicians and religious leaders face today?
Well, I think as I had said before, one of the things that is interesting is that as more power is coming back to the states, that politicians have to kind of, when they're out running for election, really need to get an understanding of the areas that they're in and how religion plays a role in how people are voting. I don't think that people are voting, are separating themselves from their faith, especially in some states. You look at like Texas or some of the states down south, how you stand on some of these issues as a Christian or a Catholic is going to play into whether or not you're going to get elected. And I think that now Catholic politicians really need to address that, especially on the campaign trail. I'm not trying to say and be hypocritical here. I'm not trying to say that as a Catholic politician, you have to do these things. I'm saying that in this scenario in the film, the bishop is taking a hard line here, and it's how they deal with it afterwards, and their own, internal, their own backstories themselves. The film is really, it's about forgiveness. It's about understanding. I had said to Harry, one of the interesting things was in the film itself, the politician meets with Bishop Rowland and says, at the time she's president, and she says, I want to form a coalition of all faiths, and I want you to be our liaison to the Vatican. And President Trump just formed a coalition on the 7th of all faiths to bridge the gap between politics and religion. I don't think you can separate the two. Good, bad, or indifferent. I think Catholic politicians, especially as a Catholic, they're going to need to address these things. And I think it's just a matter of time before, things kind of ramp themselves up.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting that you just brought up Donald Trump. And you're talking about Catholicism, and he did just reengage the Faith Council. And he put Paula White over it, but she's Christian, and he doubled down on making this country more focusing on Christian values. Since you brought that up, what are your thoughts, or do you think, is there a difference, or do we have to be a universal church and include all religions, or do you see a conflict with him focusing on Christianity instead of Catholicism or Islam or things like that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that we all need to have the freedom of religion to do what we want to do. But before President Trump, when he was running, this was one of his platforms, and people knew that he was pushing the Catholic or the Christian ideals. So, not that I'm saying that it's right, but I'm saying that this is one of the things he said he was going to do, and this is what he's doing. I just think that before, people have or the politicians tried to separate these things, and he's not separating it. And, good or bad, he's pushing an agenda that focuses on Christian ideals of in my mind, forgiveness, of helping one another. Now, whether that should just be, let's just try and help one another or forgive one another, I think that he's looking at it a different way, and people are going to have to address it because it's in the forefront. We're made up of a lot of faiths in this world, and especially in this country. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Godless, where's it gonna? Is this gonna be on the big screen, Netflix? Where can folks catch Godless?
So we were in the theaters back in November, and now we're going to be streaming on February 28th on Apple, Google Play, Fandango, At Home, and Amazon. And then we should have a Vimeo site up as well for people. So if you go to @GodlessMovie, any of the updates, any of the links will be there, as well as that'll go to the website.
Yeah, and Harry, gotta ask you about your Broadway experience. I understand that you are in the Felicia Rashad directed play Purpose. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, Purpose is a play by a very celebrated young playwright named Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. And he wrote the play Appropriate, which won the Tony last year, I think, for Best Play. And he has written a family drama. Some people might think they recognize certain prominent Black political families.
Jesse Jackson.
Some people think that it's him, but it is not Jesse Jackson. But a lot of people in Chicago sure thought so, Stacey.
Well, there was a lot of controversy about that.
There was some extent, but we were also, a very successful play, the top grossing play in Steppenwolf theater history so far, and we now are getting a Broadway berth. We opened February 25th so in a couple of weeks for previews, and then we open officially March 17th. Magnificent cast: LaTanya Richardson Jackson. Glenn Davis, who's the artistic director at Steppenwolf, is in the cast. Alana Arenas, Steppenwolf member. John Michael Hill, also a Steppenwolf member. And then the radiant Kara Young, who also won the Tony last year for Best Featured Performance of an Actress in a Play for, I think, for Pearlie. But yeah, she's in it as well. So it's a terrific cast, and I think the most exciting play of the new season.
Harry, I have a fun question.
Go ahead.
I have a fun question for you. You can only choose one. Broadway, if Broadway or movies. If you can only participate in one, would it be Broadway or movies?
Well, because I'm currently working on Broadway, I'm going to say Broadway.
Okay.
Yeah, Broadway.
Well, what's the difference in preparation, if there's any difference, when it comes to Broadway and movies?
This is an age-old question, Stacey. It's actors, many actors, particularly those who only do film or a screen type of work think that you have to be very small, in terms of your gestures and mannerism and so on, when you're doing that work because of the camera and its ability to move, and that they think that, in acting and theater, you have to be bigger. I don't find that there's much of a distinction, particularly anymore. The frank fact of the matter is that the technology in theater is so much advanced, and in movies too, but we can whisper on stage now, is before you really need to be trained to project and these things. The theaters have, in many ways, very intimate, the way the science of the theater. I happen to be building a performing arts center in Chicago right now. So we have to study these things, how they work. So I think that it's almost like comparing running a marathon to a sprint in a way. You have to have a much longer kind of concentration span doing a play, because you're not being able to do it over and over again. You have to wait the next night to do the whole thing again. So I think it's really a matter internally of differentiations rather than extrinsic.
Awesome. And I just want to briefly, before we let you go, and I know Neil probably has another question or two, but I got to go back to the whole controversy with the Jackson family. I know that they, like you said, a lot of people believe it was based on that, and you look at a lot of the similarities. How did you and the cast, as a cast, how did you guys work through that, knowing that this controversy was going on, knowing that this was this huge issue in Chicago, as you put it?
Well, I guess I could be clever and political about it, but I'm just going to tell you, we did talk about it. I'm from Chicago, born and raised. I am fraternity brothers with Jesse Jr. and Sr. So we run in many of the same circles, and I was very sensitive to it in a way that, the actors who are not from Chicago or were not as old as I am, who remember the prominence of Reverend Jackson. I mean, my God, he was absolutely my hero as a child, but I knew that it would be an issue, and it was. But the people still came out and saw it. They supported it and loved it. There were some conversations out there in the audience, I'm sure. But the bottom line is that we acquit whatever family this is based on very well. It's a dynamic family. They love each other. There's drama that happens they're not immune from it because of their prominence in the community. But I don't think we're casting any aspersions on here that is in some way damaging, to any family. I think that this is a view of what a family in the 21st century, in a changing and evolving political landscape, in some sense devolving, what the heck is going on, and how would that impact a family who's been around for multiple generations in these United States. I think that's so people can take away from that what they will, but I don't think that they would see this as some sort of a hit piece. On the contrary.
Okay, so we're talking about the movie Godless that'll be streaming on February 28th on Apple. Really excited about that. Before we let you go, Michael, I want to ask you, why did you pick the title Godless?
Interestingly, it was originally going to be called ipso facto, right? The act speaks for itself, because in certain situations you can excommunicate yourself. You don't need to have a bishop excommunicate you. If you desecrate the sacrament, that's an excommunicatable offense. So I originally had it as ipso facto. The act speaks for itself, and I was with the Monsignor, Monsignor Alessandro, and he's like, "Yeah, that's not. This is you don't want to call it that, because this is something different. This is an actual affirmative act." So we kind of wrestled around with it, and we came to onto Godless as the title.
Awesome. Well, it's streaming on February 28th. It's Godless at Godless Movie. So check it out. And Mike, we certainly appreciate you And Harry, much success, much continued success, not only with this film but on Broadway and beyond. Thanks for joining the Black Presses. Let it be known. We really appreciate both of you.
Yeah, I
Thank you
can't
so
wait to
much.
watch it.
Thank you so much. Be well.
Absolutely. Take care. Interesting stuff, Neil. Interesting
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm really interested in. I love those types of films. I love politics. I love religion. So I can't wait to check it out. And I can check it out in my home on Apple. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah, I saw you get excited about the Apple part. Is Oprah still involved in Apple?
I don't know. I don't know. I know
Okay.
she has own Discovery. I don't know if Discovery is affiliated with
She
Apple.
was involved in the whole launch of Apple TV.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So
I know she has a podcast on Apple, but I don't know about the.
yeah, she was. February 28th, the economic blackout is February 28th. Are you participating, Neil?
Why not? We're talking about, what are we gonna do? I figure I'm gonna have to participate in something, you know. So,
The fast, the blackout.
I would love to see though, and I think this is the most simplest way to show if we all participate our buying power.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the key is if we all participate in that economic blackout on February 28th, it will show, like you said, the buying power. I did want to bring this up. On January the 30th, I got an email from Eric Dumas, right? He represents Praz from the Fugees. And he shared with me that Trump was considering pardoning Praz, but I didn't do anything with it because, Neil, to be frank, information coming from Praz's camp over the past couple of years to us has not been as forthright. And so it was like a wait and see type of thing. And so now the Hollywood Reporter is reporting that Trump is considering a pardon for Praz, who is facing 22 years in prison in a federal conspiracy and corruption case. Apparently there is some consideration. Now there is some connections for Praz and Trump. In fact, the ties run a little bit deeper than one might think, because the guy who's handling Praz's clemency request, Representative Rudy Giuliani, and of course we know that Trump appeared in one of Praz's a video Praz was in, Ghetto Superstar. So they have a relationship from there. So and during that, there was a voicemail interlude in Ghetto Superstar. People might remember where Trump says, "I have no doubt that you're going to be a big success. I hope very soon you're going to be in the leagues with me." So Trump is poised to make that happen for Praz, who faces 22 years. So just wanted to bring that up.
Well, this falls in line with, the charges fall in line with the whole thing that we started with Eric Adams in the beginning. So anything that has to do with foreign affairs, corruption, money, that's Trump's game. So it's not surprising. And then he is so self-absorbed. You brought up that he's on Praz's song Ghetto Superstar or something. I mean, that's enough. That's enough for him to say.
That is enough for him.
Yeah, let the boy out. Let the boy out. That's enough for him.
That's enough. Oh gosh. And before we close, I know Neil likes to do the Black History moment. Well, I came up with 3 of them. So, number 1, on this date in Black history in 1923, the first, and Orangey, are you still with me here? The first Black professional basketball team was organized. They were called at the time the Renaissance. And we know that in New York, they eventually became the Knickerbockers and the Knicks. And in 1957, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference organized a New Orleans meeting with Martin Luther King Jr. as president on this date in 1957. And finally, on this date in 1970, the New York Stock Exchange admitted its first Black member, Joseph Surlees. So there's our Black history moments, Niel.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Now we
You
got to
like that?
mix it up and put a Black history of today.
Okay.